Welcome back to The Move. We're vibing through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that one time in the Bible where God commands Abraham to kill his one and only son. If you're wondering where in the world is this coming from, it's Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 24. My guest today is Pastor Harold. Pastor Harold, I'm very excited to talk about this on a number of levels because I think on one obvious level, this is where the narrative has been leading for quite some time, 20-something chapters. But also, this is one of those stories that I've always had a handful of questions. Long story short, Abraham is visited by God and God's like, yo, kill your son. And then many people remember the rest of the story. But that's even just from the very beginning, I have questions. One question is, I've always thought about the morality of obeying versus disobeying God when it comes to something like this. I was taught, maybe this is too simplistic, maybe it's not nuanced enough, I don't know, but I was taught as a kid that, simply sin kind of distilled in one way, shape, or form. The idea of sin is when you're not obeying or not listening to God. And I wonder, what would have happened if Abraham said no? Like, no, I'm good. Like, I think I kind of like my kid. I don't want to kill him.
Man, that's a great question. What would have happened if he would have said no? Then maybe we wouldn't have... If he would have said no, he wouldn't have experienced what he experienced. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. If he would have said no...
I guess maybe the more pointed question is, would he have gotten in trouble? Like if he said no, does God now punish him for disobedience to what is, I think, a very clear immoral thing to ask?
I mean, in the 21st century Seventh-day Adventist Christian context in which we live in, it is, clearly immoral. But was it immoral and weird for Abraham in the time in which he lived in which the deities that he was accustomed to? Again, like we've got a whole swath of information, and I'm just asking right now, we have a whole swath of information and of history and of influence that is at this point 4,000 years old from Abraham, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, Abraham was not a Christian. He was not an Adventist. He was not even a Jew. He was a Mesopotamian guy who came from a Mesopotamian context. So I wonder if, though it's clearly immoral for us to sacrifice your son, one, was it at the same level of disgust and shock for Abraham? And two, it would also... Well, I'm thinking of another thing, that there's a little key in the first verse of that chapter, right?
Okay.
In which it says, after these things, God tested Abraham. So like right there, it says, Vayehi achar hadevarim. Like it's the first thing, there's this little word nisa. There's this little word nisa in Hebrew that is already giving us a clue of like what's going to happen is a test, is a... Right. It's sort of like we're going to see what is going to occur, right?
Right. But Abraham doesn't know it's a test at this point. No. So he's either like he's forced to obey what is like what you're saying, maybe culturally is not as weird as it is to us. Because I get what I'm hearing you say is that back in those times, the idea of a deity requiring human sacrifice maybe wasn't that abnormal. I mean, we certainly see examples of that all around the world where this was... maybe not common practice, but it wasn't abnormal in the sense that it never happened.
Right, it wasn't uncommon. And I don't know, again, I'm wondering with you out loud, because it is a question that comes up multiple times, but I don't know, maybe Abraham, it's almost as if Abraham hears this. And remember, Abraham is not, this isn't the voices in my head, right?
Right.
This isn't like some sort of like, he had too many tacos, too many falafel. At this point, like the narrative has sort of painted the fact that, first of all, it's not a disembodied presence of God, but God's word comes embodied. Okay,
so there is a physical being, or what at least appears to be a physical being in front of him, asking Abraham to do this.
Right, in the text, in the previous text, in chapter 12 or in chapter, 13 or 12, where he says, and he came, and the word of the Lord brought him out of the tent, right? So if it's just the voices in your head, that phrasing brought him out would make no sense whatsoever. right? And it's not just there, but for example, Samuel, right? Like when Samuel is called Samuel, it says in the word of the Lord stood in front of.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
right, it's stuff that we sometimes miss in the text, and it's like, wait, what? So there is some sort of embodied physical presence of Adonai, of God, coming to Abraham. So at this point of the story, we have already seen Abraham from chapter 12, where he was Abram, come all the way to chapter 22 now, where he's Abraham or Abraham. And whatever the voice is required, whatever the presence, the word of the Lord is coming to him, he is at a point in this relationship that, as bizarre as this is and as weird as this is, he's going to go through it. What's more is then in Hebrews 11, the author of Hebrews makes the connection that even if he was like thinking that God would even resurrect him from the dead.
Right. And I think that might be the redeeming thing here, is that even if Abraham in his own mind is like, what in the world, what is going to happen here? It does seem like you're saying, Hebrews is saying that he's believing that the child will be resurrected, even if it is sacrificed. Clearly, because God made the promise that my line or your descendants are going to come specifically through this son.
Right.
It was the promise was localized in this specific son, not just another son from another woman. Like we've kind of been through that, all those growing pains of like, well, where's it going to come from? God's like, no. Let me clear it up. It's absolutely going to be coming through Isaac. And so even if Abraham knows that he's going to sacrifice this kid, he knows that something has to happen with Isaac such that there's children that come from him.
And I think another thing that comes from the text, as you mentioned that, not just from Hebrews, but back again from the original text that we sometimes miss, is there's a little phrasing in chapter 2 where he says, and God said, and there's two things actually that take place. So the first one is this little it's like a little suffix. It's a na. So it's like, and he said, take your son, your only son, right? And we kind of miss the nuance of this is an entreating particle. So when he says vayomer kahna, it says, and he said, it's literally saying, please take. Almost like, hey, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to do something for me. So it's not even a demand, a callous, like removed demand of like, give me your son. It's more of a Abraham, and Abraham says, here I am, right? It's like, and the word of the Lord came to him, and Abraham said, here I am, hineni. This little phrase also is repeated throughout the entirety of that story. Hineni, here I am, right? I'm here. I need you to do me something. I need you to do something special for me, like a favor, like something. So I need you to take, and it is going to get through what you were pointing out of the son. I need you to take your son, et binha, et yachidcha, right? Your son, your only son, the one whom you love, Isaac. Like it is incredibly specific.
Yeah.
So he says, I need you to take your son, your yechidcha. And this phrase is incredibly special because it is one that is translated in the Septuagint as monogenes, which is one of a kind, but we translate it as only begotten. But it's not only begotten as in like it's the only one that's birthed. It's really one of a kind. He is unique. So your unique son, Isaac, and the uniqueness of Isaac was that he was the child of promise. He was miraculously conceived. See what's happening there? Miraculously conceived. And he is unique in the way that he exists in that there's only one like him in the entirety of the universe. Right.
Well, okay. So what I'm hearing, and I'm going to connect some of the dots because I'm guessing a lot of people are seeing where you're going here. Is that this is a lived out parable, if you will. It's a play acting the story of Jesus in the sense that Jesus is the only begotten. He's the monogenes. He's the unique, one of a kind son. He's the beloved son, and now this son is meant to be sacrificed. Or to be given as a burnt offering, as it says in this chapter.
Right. So if you're going to be the source of blessing, and the source of blessing is in fact that story, it would come to it would be sort of like sensible to think out. We need to act like you need to live this out, right? And it is, nobody denies. I think that it is a bizarre request, especially for us. Right. I just wonder I wonder what level of bizarreness it was for Abraham, one, and two, again, he is already at a point in his journey in his experience that he has heard this he has seen this presence before. He knows that this voice is not some crazy out of the world
Right.
thing. This is
It saved Lot and his family from the
Yep.
destruction
Th-
of Sodom.
this is
We've
the
seen
s-
him.
the
Yeah.
same
okay.
faithful presence.
Hmm.
The same faithful presence that has been with him through his blunders in Egypt twice. The same faithful presence that has been there is asking him, not demanding, but is asking, is entreating him, is saying, hey, I need something special.
So there's a bit of a track record. And
Yeah.
it's important, I guess, for us to look at this chapter with this track record, because otherwise, why would you use one? It's not a disembodied voice.
No.
So why would you just listen to the voice in your head?
Exactly.
What makes us different from a schizophrenic? Well, the fact that it's not a disembodied
yeah.
voice, but also that there's a track record of miraculous intervention with this inviting party.
Right.
And so Abraham is tempted, he's tempted to believe that this voice has his best interest in mind. And I think that this is actually brought out in verse 5, where Abraham tells the servant, stay here with the donkey. He says, the boy and I are going to travel a little bit farther. We'll worship there. And then he says, we will come right back. So there's this beautiful moment where Abraham, maybe not knowing exactly how it's going to go down, he knows that he's going to have to sacrifice a child, or at least that's the invitation from the word. But he still says, we will be coming right back. So there's an element of faith that whether it's through resurrection or through something else that's going to happen, my kid is actually going to, at the end of the day, still be alive.
Right. And the other thing that we might be missing that sometimes we sort of gloss over is that we're not talking about a teenage boy or a kid. Isaac's quite the grown man at this point. Like, he could easily overpower the old man. Is the reason it's the reason why he puts the wood. And again, the narrative, it's like the narrative is written in such a way that when you pause and read it, and this happened to me the first time when I read this in the original language in Hebrew was in the seminary. So like that's where this story became incredibly deep and significant for me. It was when I actually was able to go through it verse by verse in Hebrew, and it just blew my mind how the narrative is written in such a way that you see the angst. So it's not that Abraham is like, okay, cool, whatever. There's angst in the story that is written. And it is written there. He says, so he says, and Abraham said, and we will come back to you. And so Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on Isaac, right? So Isaac carries...
is the one carrying the wood.
Carries the wood, right?
Well, let's do this, because I think there's so much here. And I want to make sure that we're giving good bang for our buck as far as the amount of time that we're going to spend on this chapter. Because this is an amazing chapter. We could spend several episodes on this. But let's kind of go through bullet point by bullet point. What are the things that we should be paying attention to that have a specific application to the story of Jesus, right? We talked about the beginning where there's the only begotten, right? The beloved son. That's definitely an allusion
the one whom you love,
to the one whom you love. So that's definitely an allusion to Jesus. You just mentioned the idea of carrying the wood on his back in the same way that Jesus is carrying the cross. What else are we seeing here?
Well, this is so he says the burnt offering laid on Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. And this phrase is going to be used twice in this to slow down the narrative. That last phrase says, so the two of them walked together. Also, that walking together is tied from the very first time. It's the same phrase that is repeated here in 1, is also in 12. Like go. And now it's like go. And in chapter 12, it's go to the place I will tell you. And there it's go to the mountain I will tell you. So like it's almost like this story is the bookend of Abraham's journey. He started with go to the place I will tell you, and now it finishes
with
there
together.
Go to the place where I will show you, right? And so it's bookends, right? Now, and the two of them walked together. Like it slows it down. It is very specific, telling you the two of them walked together. And then it says, and this is the part that gets me of the narrative, that these two verses, right? Because you read it and it says, and he said, and Isaac said to Abraham, my father, to Abraham his father, right? He said, Avi, is like this daddy, right? Avi, my father, right? And Abraham responds, Hineni beni, like, here I am, my son. Like there's these endearment terms between these two characters. Father and son endeared to each other. My father, my son. And he asks the question, the fire is here, the wood is here. Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Right? And dude, if you're Abraham, what do you say?
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to
I-
lie to the boy. And
Mm.
he's not going to lie, which
Which is bizarre because he's done
Right.
his fair share of lying up to this point in the story.
My sister, right?
yeah.
And so he doesn't answer directly either. He doesn't say, "Well, you're going to be it," but he answers this incredibly beautiful theological truth. He says, "God Himself will provide the lamb for the mount for the offering." Right? It's that it does verse says like the Lord. This is where we get that Jireh phrase.
Yeah.
Right. It's like
The Lord will provide.
The Lord will provide. Right. He will provide, and then it finishes again. And the two of them walked together. All right. So notice like if we're taking one parallel again to the story of Jesus, it's this: the two of them walked together.
Yeah. So in the same way that people sometimes will say, "Oh, it was just Jesus on the cross, and the Father's completely removed," is what you're saying?
A
is that
whipping boy, yeah, because God was angry, right? He's the angry God needs a whipping boy.
No. But what you're saying here is at least what this story is seeming to suggest is that both the Father and the Son, the Father and Jesus, were united in the act of the sacrifice on the cross.
Right. The Lord will provide. I mean, yireh. It's like Elohim yireh lo, like He will provide, and that's it. And so then they get to the place, and they came to the place where, and it's slow. It's giving you every single painstaking detail in the narrative to slow it down, to tell you. Because the narrative is always quick, right? Like it's 1-2 phrases and it's done. But here it's like giving you every painstaking detail that it can to show you what's happening between these two characters, right? And they came to the place where God had shown him. Abraham built an altar, laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac, right? Laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. That's like, dude, the picture, right? The image right there. And all of a sudden, when you think, it's almost like you're gasping for breath, like what is going to happen? But the angel of the Lord calls from the heavens. Abraham, do not lay your hand on that boy. Right. And this is where the story goes, like, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Right. And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Right. So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide. Oh man, that whole yireh, every time it just gets me, because when you begin to think of how the Lord will provide, right? God will provide. The Lord will provide. Adonai yireh, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. The parallels of the story are just impossible to miss. And I think that here one of the deep things that we also get is when God says, now I know. It sort of opens the question of like, well, doesn't God know everything? Yes, but also there is something that we sort of miss, in that God's foreknowledge doesn't necessarily mean God's predestination or predetermination of something. Just because God can see something or God can look at the possibility of something doesn't mean that something is going to happen, because once again, the factor is free will. And Abraham, in fact, could have said no, right? He could have said no. He could have said, yeah, nah, peace, bro. We're out. I'm not doing this. But that's why God says, now I know. It is like, there's this, it's almost like it ties it back to the Lord tested, and it opens up some interesting questions about like, how much trust does God have in us, to the point that he will put a test that it's almost like he'll pass. Now I know, now I know.
Yeah. There have been people who have done different artistic renditions of this story, because it's such a pillar story in the Christian, and I guess in the Jewish tradition as well. Right. And there's a handful of interpretations of the story where, for example, in the Rembrandt, the angel of the Lord that's like calls out to stop Abraham. It's a little bit more violent, in the sense that the angel's literally physically grabbing the hand of Abraham as he's mid plunge, about to sacrifice his child. Right. And I don't know if the language gives us that kind of clarity that's kind of how it happened, but I wonder what it's like as Abraham kind of in the middle of this, like he's about to sacrifice it. We definitely get the sense that he's gone further than just like, oh yeah, we have the wood, but like no, like the narrative seems to suggest like he's in the moment to do. He's picked up the knife to kill,
Yeah.
and it's just like, man, what is happening here as far as how God intervenes in that last second?
I think that, man, that's such a great question. And at least the imagery in my head when I get from this is that Abraham is going to go through it no matter what.
Hmm.
And I think we also miss out that Isaac is going to go through it.
Yeah, and that's something that's not shouldn't be overlooked. You were talking about how Isaac is a man at this point, could easily overpower the 100-something-year-old Abraham.
He easily could have said, "You crazy old man, peace. I'm out.
Right.
Carry your own wood, bro." But he doesn't. He goes like he submits to this. Both of them submit. Both of them are going to go through it, and it shows the depth. So the image that I get is the one of a father that's going to go through this weird, strange request. But he's going to go with the faith of believing that he would resurrect him from the dead, even if he would resurrect him from the death. You know, that even if that, though it's not in the text, but it just hits me right now. It's almost like the three Jews,
the Hebrew boys in Daniel,
where they were like, which again were grown men. They were not boys. They were.
Yeah, that's fair.
They were grown men.
All the felt stories that I remember learning in church. The little boys,
teenagers. No, these were they were grown men. And they're like, listen, we're not going to worship your idol. We're going to go through this, even if. Like, it's not, he will. It's like, he can. But even if he doesn't, like, bro, we're not doing this, right? So the image that I have is Abraham just right there. And God intervening, I don't know, maybe at the first second of the knife coming down and say, hey, Abraham, like this double call, right? Abraham, stop your hand. And you can almost, in my mind, I almost picture like Abraham, like just breathing the sigh of relief.
Absolutely.
That he doesn't, like that he stopped and the knife just falling out of his hand. And he hears the Lord saying, stop, do not hurt the lad, because now I know, right? And then they utter the promise again, right? So the Lord will provide, and then the angel of the Lord called Abraham a second time and says, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, right? Again, the same, your only son, your one-of-a-kind son. I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as stars, the heavens, sands of the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gates of their enemies. That's a key aspect to the promise that is repeated again to Isaac later on. Spoiler alert. And Abraham returns, right? And then he goes his way. But this whole just beautiful parallel of the story that we just can't miss, how the father had to go through it.
Yeah.
On that mountain.
It's amazing, and I think what we're doing in this episode is kind of what's certainly natural, because we have a relationship with Abraham now after however many episodes we've been following his life for 100 years or whatever the case is. But one of the ways to see this story, obviously, is through the eyes of Jesus, which in this instance is Isaac. And it makes me think of John chapter 10, verse 18, where it says, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. And it's exactly like how the Isaac could have resisted his father, could have said, no, there's no way that this is going to happen. Like Abraham is incapable of securing this young, healthy, vibrant young man down to the wood. So I don't know, maybe this is over exaggerated. I don't know. But in my mind, one of the ways that this story could have played out is that both Abraham and Isaac's hand are on the knife together, that they're doing this simultaneously together. And even Isaac, I think this is a real testament to the relationship that Abraham and Isaac have together, yes, but also how Isaac has been able to learn to trust this not the disembodied spirit, but this idea of the Word of God who's showed up in his life. And maybe that's through these stories that Abraham has been sharing along the way. Maybe there's other instances where the Word of God has come through for Isaac himself, and that maybe not recorded in the narrative, but there's certainly a level of trust that Isaac has with God himself, so much to the extent that he's willing to lay his own life down as well.
one of the things that, I think that that's one of the things that is very implicit in the text that we sometimes overlook, because the main character in this story is, well, Abraham, right?
Hmm.
But it is the binding of Isaac, right?
Yeah.
And Isaac is the one who's carried the wood. Isaac is the one who tacitly in the text with even probably submits himself to it, just like you've read in John. One of the things that also comes to my mind, and that was very special for me, is when I had the opportunity to go to Israel, and I had the
Mm.
opportunity to go to Jerusalem, and how it is said that when you go to like the Temple Mount today, the current Temple Mount, where the Golden Dome is,
Hmm.
that is the place where the temple used to stand, where the Temple of Solomon used to be, where this mount was, like this mountain there, this Mount Moriah, Moriah, right? The mountain where the Lord shall provide. And you kind of, it's very special to stand in a place where something so deep happened,
Mm.
right? Where something so deep happened, especially when you look at how it is not just it's not just of earthly proportions or ethnic proportions, but it is of cosmic dimension.
Mm.
Like the sacrifice of the one beloved son, the one of a kind son, not just because he was like he was miraculously birthed, but because he is man and and God at the same time. There is no other being in the entire universe that is composed like Jesus is, God and man. Like
Mm.
no other. There is none like him, right? That that one when he voluntarily submits in Gethsemane, where he
Mm.
says, "Not my will, but your will be done."
Mm.
Where he chooses death, where he chooses to be the ram in the thicket, right? Where he chooses to be the provision of God. Of God will see to it. I love that translate. I love how that word is used. Yire. It literally means God will see to it. Like,
Mm.
don't worry, he's going to see to it. Anything that is, he's going to see to it. I love that way of looking at that verse, and that he will see to it.
Mm.
And Jesus himself, right, is going to be that he saw to it. There's no
Mm.
ram in the thicket for him. He's the ram in the thicket.
Yeah.
He's the one
Yeah.
that becomes the propitiation. He is the one. So so to be on that mountain and to be able to declare and tell that story, um, is central to our lives and to the cosmic dimension of the gospel. It,
Yeah.
there's that's I mean, yeah, I'm kind of dumbfounded and lacking of words, which I wish I had better words to describe the
It's okay. It's not
monumental,
like it's a podcast.
right, right, of like just what this is, of how
Yeah.
beautiful the story is. And yes, it isn't free of controversy, and it isn't free of asking questions.
Hmm.
But when you begin to read the story, I wonder if that's the point. Kind of
Mm.
like a couple of episodes back, you and Jonathan were discussing about like Abraham's behavior with Sarai in Egypt, right?
Hmm.
I wonder if the point is once again missed sometimes by us when we focus on that aspect of the story and say, well, that's a weird one. And we go on and on and on and on. And maybe that's not the point of that story.
Hmm.
The point of the story is not for us to get tied up in the weeds of like the weird request of God, but
Hmm.
it is to understand to what extent he will see to it. And
Hmm.
he will always see to it. He already saw to it in the life of Abraham. He saw to it there. He sees to it. He sees it in your life. He sees it in my life. Oddly enough, it's the same word that Hagar used. He
Hmm.
sees me,
Yeah.
right? And so now he saw to it, and he will see to it. He's never stopped seeing to anything. So he will continue because God is faithful. I think if anything from the whole Abraham story that we've been going through in all these chapters is that God is faithful. Man, that's one aspect, I guess.
Yeah, that verse 16, as the story winds up, he says, "By myself I have sworn," declares the Lord. God is putting his own reputation on the line when it comes to this story. So I get what you're saying in that there's a lot of really weird things that are happening in this moment, in
Mhm,
this chapter. There's a lot of big questions that maybe aren't always satisfactorily
mhm,
answered. But one thing should be clear, and that's the heart of God on display and his faithfulness towards his people. Even though it's a really weird way to make the lesson known to Abraham, especially by kind of the lens with which we would read this passage, it seems like just a really bizarre parenting tactic as far as like wanting to teach Abraham that he's going to come through. But what we do see on display is that God is going to go to the very ends. And we see that while he invited Abraham into experiencing his heart in this way by sacrificing his son, but then stopping him from actually having to go through it. One thing that we see that's different with Yahweh is that he doesn't stop. He doesn't pull his punches.
No.
He is willing to go all the way to the cross. And one thing that I love, and maybe we're going too far into this, but one of my favorite commentators on the story of the gospel in the book Desire of Ages says that the Savior could not see through the portals of the tomb. It's this idea that sometimes we, knowing the end of the story, know that Jesus is going to be resurrected, but in that moment, what it seems to be suggesting is that Jesus really actually had to live by faith, had to trust the word of the Lord as he's heading towards the cross, not having full assurance of whether or not he would be resurrected or not. Of course, he's heard the promises. He knows that God is faithful. He believes that God would raise him. But at the end of the day, there's this big what if. And we see that even in the face of the most profound what if statement possible, Jesus still says, not my will, which is to circumvent the pain and the separation and the angst that's going to happen. But rather than that is to follow God's will because he trusts in his word. And that's the heart of the God that's on display in this chapter.
Now I know. Now I know. Like that aspect of free will that you just touched upon is huge. Now I know, right?
And maybe the point of this passage is, God is saying in this moment, now I know, right? Through the story. But I think through this story, and as we understand it in the light of the cross, now we get to say, now I know.
Now I know.
Now I know that God wouldn't even withhold his only begotten son, that God truly, actually is for me.
For the joy set before him, right? He endured the cross. Like he looked at, there's a friend of ours who says he saw into the future. He saw you. He saw that you were such a good idea that he plunged head first, right? And that is the heart of God at display here. It is a God who will not stop at anything to provide everything for you and for me to be saved. That is God's faithfulness with himself, with us. Not with himself, but with us. And he proves it because he himself does it. Like, I was just hearing the episode where you and Ben go through the chapter 15 where he walks the covenant. Like, it's beautiful, right? So
makes a covenant with himself. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I'll do it. I guess I'll do it myself. That was a very dark echo. So, no, God does it himself.
Hey, if you're still with us, awesome. It's been 30 plus minutes. We say the episode is 10 minutes at a time. And this is one of those examples where Pastor Harold does his pastoral thing.
Oh, stop. And you ask questions. No. Don't blame it on me.
We just want to say thank you guys for joining us on the podcast, on the YouTube channel. It's been such a joy. We've been actually getting several messages in DMs and comments on the videos just saying how several of you guys are using this on your walk to work or while you're working out. We're just overjoyed that we get to share this journey with you guys. And we want to say a huge thank you to those of you who have helped make this show possible. There are a handful of you guys supporting the move on Patreon over at patreon.com/jku. And you are the team that's enabling this ministry, helping to fund it, to buy microphones and to provide for the editing and all the different things that go in. So you guys are the unsung heroes. And we just want to let you guys know that we really do appreciate you guys, the sacrifice that you and your families are making to pledge. And yes, thank you guys very much.